Welcome to Stand to Reason, friends. That's our show, and I am your host, Greg Kokel. Glad to be with you today. And I was just thinking, we got a bunch of callers on board. I'm going to be getting to all of you here in this next hour. But I wanted to share a thought that was stimulated by a broadcast that I was on another station yesterday, I guess. And I was actually, the caller understood my own general view about the thing he questioned me on, and I wasn't sure about that. That's why I had to ask him the question. But here was the question he tossed out. He said, "How do we learn to recognize the voice of God?" And I went, "Are you familiar with my view on this, or are you just asking this out of the blue?" Then he kind of chuckled. He said, "No, I'm familiar with your view." So, he's tossing me a softball. He knows where I'm going to go with this. And I want to explain to you in kind of summary what I offered him on that particular point. Now, I wrote a solid ground called When God Speaks that came out just recently. And so this is available on our website, and I cover this point, all right? How can we learn to recognize or hear the voice of God, all right? And my answer is that it's not possible to learn to hear the voice of God. What? Yeah, well, think about it. Either God is speaking to you or he's not, right? Okay. If he's not speaking to you, there is nothing to hear. Now, I'm not saying God isn't speaking. I'm just saying, in terms of logical categories, if he's not speaking, there's nothing to hear. And if there's nothing to hear, then there's no learning involved in hearing. It's not available, all right? That's one option. Well, what if he is speaking? Oh, that's an option. If he is speaking, you can't miss it. All right? If he is speaking, you can't miss it. And I say this with some authority because there is absolutely no place in Scripture. You can start at the beginning and go to the end, all 66 books, many occasions where God speaks to many people in many ways. You will never find a single occasion where God is attempting to communicate with someone and they don't hear. It doesn't happen. Think of Saul of Tarsus. Unregenerate, persecutor of Christians, on his way to arrest more Christians and have them put to death. And Jesus speaks to him and says, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" Saul had no trouble hearing Jesus, even though he wasn't listening for Jesus, even though he was unregenerate. And the reason for that is because God doesn't try. Know how people will say, well, God's trying to talk to you, but, you got the rock and roll up too loudly, or too loud, I should say. And, you've got a lot of busyness in your life. You need to just listen, and then you'll hear. Do you realize what a libel that is on the character of God? That God can't get his voice heard unless you help him. You turn the volume down in your life, on the radio, whatever, in your headset. No. I know people have used an example. They say, look, when you're working at your computer, whatever, and your wife is talking to you, and you're going, whatever, but you're not hearing her because you're focused on what you're doing, okay? Well, God's trying to talk to all of us, but a lot of times, the story goes, we are too focused on what we're doing that we can't hear him. And so one of the secrets is you got to calm down. You've got to actively listen. Well, this is hokum. God is not trying to communicate. because trying implies the possibility of failure, which in fact is going on according to them, that God is trying, but he's failing, and the Christian is the problem. Well, God can only fail on two counts. Either he doesn't have enough knowledge to succeed, or he doesn't have the power to succeed. But God has all knowledge and all power. He lacks nothing to succeed in anything he attempts to do. So God, when he puts his will, or I should say, puts his power to his will, whatever it is he wills gets accomplished. God does whatever he wills, the text says, on heaven and earth. When God wants to do something, he does it. So how is it that people say that God is trying to talk to you when he doesn't try? Well, they're confused. And by the way, there are good, godly, decent people who hold this view, but it just strikes me as obviously a libel on the character and the capability of God. God doesn't try. And as you look in the book of Acts, 13 examples from Pentecost to the end of God giving revelation, intervening with some directive or guidance. Only 13 times in 30 years, all right? When you look at each of those, every one of them, and most of this is in the article, by the way. So I'm repeating what's already there, but so you can go back there to check it out. But keep this in mind. In every single case where we have detail of the phenomenology, what I mean by phenomenology, I mean the way in which God communicates. So I was just reading here in Numbers. I'm working through Numbers. It's a work too, because it's not a fun book to read. God spoke to Moses, and he said. So the phenomenology was speaking, all right? In the case of Joseph, when Jesus was born and he was threatened by Herod, Joseph had a dream, and so God spoke to Joseph in a dream. So the phenomenology was the dream. So when you look at the phenomenology in the book of Acts, every single time that we know from the detail of the text what the phenomenology was, it's a supernatural phenomena. There's a dream, there's a vision. The Holy Spirit speaks. An angel shows up. At least 2 jailbreaks. The angel shows up. Jesus stands by the bed in a vision, by Paul's bed in Corinth, saying, "Don't be afraid any longer, I have many people in the city." So the phenomenology is not a nudge, nudge, hint, hint. I think maybe God's trying to talk to me. No, he just bowls right in. He does. He doesn't try. And of course, that the phenomenology is miraculous in those cases, there's a reason for that. It's so that it will be clear, unmistakable. And Paul makes this point when talking about, in the church, tongues without interpretation. And this is 1 Corinthians 14. And what I call the lesson of the bugle, because he uses a bugle as an illustration. Now, bugles were used as comms in warfare in ancient times, even through the Civil War. And so if you wanted your unit to move in battle in a certain way, the bugler would bugle a certain tune. And Paul says, and now he's talking about tongues given, but no interpretation. If the bugler bugles an indistinct sound, how will it be known what to do in battle? All right? And then he says this, unless we speak, now regarding tongues, unless we speak with the mouth words that are clear, how will it be known what is said? Therefore, if we have a tongue and no interpretation, it's not clear. Notice the emphasis that Paul is making on clarity with regards to supernatural revelation. It's a standard he's imposing there. But it turns out that many people are pretty convinced that God is in the habit of communicating with words that aren't clear, because they're not listening carefully enough. Well, like I said, that's hokum. Don't worry about learning to hear the voice of God. If God wants to say something to you, you won't miss it. It will be impossible to miss it because it is the power of God himself that ensures the success and the clarity of the message. There you go. All right, I'm going to jump in to my first call, and this is Caleb in Ohio. Caleb, glad you called. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Greg Kokel. Thank you for answering my call. The reason why I was calling, so I actually had two questions. I don't think that they'll be that long, so I think that we have a good chance of being able to do both of them.
Okay, we'll give it a shot.
So my first one involves evolution.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't believe in macroevolution. I don't accept the Darwinian view of evolution, but sometimes it feels kind of like hard to do that, sort of, because even though I know the evidence is for intelligent design and I know the arguments, it's just like, well, majority of scientists still believe in evolution. So it feels like I feel kind of dumb almost, even though I don't believe it and I think that there's good evidence for intelligent design. It just kind of feels dumb. I feel dumb not believing in what majority of the scientists do, especially when they label theories like intelligent design as pseudoscience, and pseudoscience is like what we would call flat Earth, and so that makes it even worse.
Yeah. Okay, now, when somebody labels intelligent design as pseudoscience, you have an opportunity here, because I agree with you. I can see how it can be awkward when it seems like everybody holds one view, and now you're going against the grain. You're swimming upstream. Why is it that everybody else thinks otherwise? All right. Well, it's interesting when they respond, intelligent design is pseudoscience. My question is, what makes it pseudoscience? Now, there's an opening here, and so I'll explain to you where I'm going with this, and then you can see why I'm asking these questions. Because science is not a word that has only one definition. It actually has two functional definitions. I got this from Phil Johnson many, many years ago. He's gone now, but he was the founding father of the intelligent design movement. And he wasn't even a scientist. He was an attorney, actually a law professor at Cal in Berkeley. But he knew nonsense when he heard it, and he heard this was nonsense, and the way it was being promoted was nonsense. So what he pointed out, is that there are two definitions operating regarding science. The first definition is a methodological definition. That is, science follows certain methods. We'll just call it the scientific method. For example, now Francis Bacon, I think he's one of the authors way back when of the scientific method. He was no atheist. In fact, virtually all the founding fathers of modern scientific disciplines, virtually every one of them, was a theist, a Christian theist of some sort. I mean, Newton wrote more on theology than he did on gravity, on physics. So there didn't seem in their mind to be a conflict between God moving and doing things in the material world and science, because they understood science as a means by which you could discover cause-effect relationships in the material realm. All right? There's nothing innately hostile about between God, religion, and science. Okay, that's one definition. But there is another definition of science that is working in the backgrounds of all of these people, which is why somebody would say, well, intelligent design is pseudoscience. And this is not a methodological definition following the evidence where it leads. It is a philosophic element that is placed over the methodological process. So in order on this view then, and that philosophical view is materialistic naturalism. Okay, so in order for something on this view now, and this is a more recent development, because this was not the case of the founders of the scientific disciplines, but since then, since the Enlightenment, and especially late in 19th century and then the 20th century, science meant two things: following a certain methodology and coming up with certain types of conclusions. So you had to do all the methodology, but you had to come up with a conclusion, that comported with metaphysical materialism. In other words, just molecules in motion, natural law. You could not insert an agent, an intelligent agent, intelligent design. That's violating the rules. Now notice that the rules that are being violated are not the rules of the methods of science that give us true information about the world, but rather a philosophical requirement that's imposed on the process. And the question that I ask is, do you want the right answers, or do you want to have the right kind of answers? And the present paradigm is you have to have the right kind of answers. If you don't come up with the right kind of answers, we're not even going to listen to whether you did your methodology correctly. You got the wrong kind of answer. You invoke God. That's not science. That's pseudoscience. Okay? Does this make sense to you so far? There's two ways of defining, and I'm sure you're familiar with this already, but does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I'm familiar with the founders of modern science, but I feel like there has been people who have responded with, well, sure, they believed in it, but that was also just because of time. I'm sure if they were alive now and they were able to see the discoveries we have made, they might have reconsidered. That was just the way it was centuries ago.
Okay, but wait a minute. Now we're talking about two different things. When you say discoveries that we have made now, well, that sounds like we're using science and the methods of science to demonstrate that Darwinian evolution is true. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about what is real science and what is not real science, because you can't even inveigh against that so-called evidence that they think makes evident Darwinian evolution true, because the minute you begin doing it, they cancel you out. They disqualify you. Oh, that's pseudoscience. That's pseudoscience. So this is why we have to have this discussion. Now, I just laid the foundation for the way I would respond. When the person says that's pseudoscience, I say, what do you mean? Well, that's not real science. What do you mean it's not real science? Well, you invoked God as an intelligent designer. Yes. Well, that's not real science. Why isn't it real science? Notice I want them to spell out what they're smuggling into the equation. Real science means that you have to always appeal to natural causes. And then the question is going to be, what if there was no natural cause? What if it was a supernatural cause? And that's a fair question. But notice how they disqualify the option before they look at the evidence. This is the shell game that's going on. And this is what the questions, I'm going to ask the questions, I just role-played it for you, of somebody who says it's pseudoscience to get them to admit, oh, what you want is the right kind of answers. You don't want the right answers. No, we want the right answers that comport materialism. Well, see, there you go. Now you're trumping the process with a philosophy. You are force-fitting the evidence into a philosophical construct. That's the point I'm going to make with them one way or another. Why don't you just follow the evidence where it leads? Every single time where you see information of the kind that we see in the DNA double helix, every single time in a human experience, it's a result of intelligence. Why is it wrong to infer that given the double helix? Oh, because you're not playing according to our rules, But that's what I want to flush out. And I think if I'm going to have a conversation, I'm going to want them to see that they're cheating. That they're cheating.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Do you know do you know the citation by I have this in one of my books somewhere, but it's all over the internet. It's easy to find, by Richard Lewontin, Lewontin. And he wrote an article when Carl Sagan died that was in the New York Review of Books. And it was called Billions and Billions of Demons. And in that, he has a whole paragraph explaining the sleight of hand that he is consciously aware of. Now, he was a Harvard geneticist. He was right at the top of the pecking order, so he could speak frankly at the cheat. And he said, we have this process because we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. We cannot allow it. It's against common sense, but we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. So if you even take that phrase, we cannot allow a divine foot in the door, and you Google it, you're going to get the quote. All right, but there's Richard Lewontin, who's admitting that we're rigging the game because we have to rig it this way. And of course, the entire discipline is like this, and if you don't play according to those rules, you'll get punished. So anyway, that's what's going on there. You were going to come back with another point. I kind of jumped on it.
No, I was saying that, yeah, I think it's a very good point that you make. And, a lot of times people who are religious or believe in intelligent design are dissed as people who don't have critical thinking or whatever. But how can you can't be more open-minded than being open to an intelligent cause or a natural cause. Like, we're open to both of them.
Exactly.
They are not.
It depends what the evidence displays. And nobody would explain a footprint in the sand, just like a two-dimensional footprint in the sand on the beach, explain that away by an appeal to natural causes. No one would do that. And the information that's evident just in the DNA double helix is like magnitudes more complex than that, yet they want to do that. Last night, as it turns out, my wife and I watched a video by Illustra Media. The video is called Metamorphosis. It's about butterflies. It is unbelievable. It's amazing. And most of the time, until the last 10 minutes of the video, they aren't talking about anything but butterflies and the unbelievable metamorphosis they go through in 4 stages, from egg to larva to pupa to adult. And then they talk about, monarchs living for 3 weeks, except for the so-called Methuselah generation that lives for 9 months and flies 2,000 to 2,500 miles down to Mexico to winter there and then finally reproduce in the spring, and then all their generations move up north into Canada, and then the whole thing repeats again. It's unbelievable. And there is conceptually, there is no possible way to even imagine how the Darwinian model, genetic mutations, small genetic mutations chosen in favor of by natural selection, little by little by little by little, could possibly account for this kind of thing. Design is all over it. And that is the common sense interpretation, unless you're so, in a certain sense, biased by this other view that you demand there must be a naturalistic explanation. But that's just pure bias. There's no relation to the evidence at all. It's an aggressive imposition of a philosophical view. But anyway, I just recommend that video to anybody. Just watch it. And you're going to see the magnificence. 20,000 varieties of butterflies. 20,000. Unbelievable. And they all go through the same process. Anyway, you had one other question. Maybe we can deal with that quickly here on the moral argument, and then I'll move on to some other callers.
Yeah, and also I noticed how you use kind of like the Columbo tactic when you're like, asking them, well, what do you mean? How is it not science? Like, what do you mean by that? What is science exactly? And It just, I'm reading tactics right now, so.
Well, we want to, good,
anyway.
and that's what you want to do, is you're using that tactic to uncover what is actually going on, which is an illicit shell game. It's a cheat. That's what's going on. Read Lewontin's quote, "We cannot allow a divine foot in the door." Read the whole paragraph. It's very revelatory. So what about the moral argument?
I'll listen to this once it comes out too, so I can remember what the name is if I forget.
Okay.
So my question about the moral argument is a lot quicker. I was just wondering, because I saw the Sean McDowell video where he asked 100 apologists what they think the best evidence is for God, and you said the moral argument.
Right.
And the moral argument is something that I've had an interest in, I've looked into, and I've seen what C.S. Lewis has written in Mere Christianity about it. And so I was wondering, what is it about the moral argument that you think makes it not just a good argument, but the best argument for God's existence?
Because, simply put, the problem of evil. The problem of evil. Doesn't matter where you live or when you lived, everybody knows something's wrong with the world. This is why folks of all stripes, theologically, even Christians, not just skeptics and atheists, have raised the problem of evil regarding God. And so they know the world is not the way it's supposed to be, right? That's one way of putting it. And it can't be not the way it's supposed to be unless there is a way it's supposed to be. And there can't be a way it's supposed to be without a sposer, to put it simply. If there is no God, there is no way it's supposed to be. And if there is no way it's supposed to be, there's no violation of any kind. If there is no God, there are no laws governing the universe, moral laws. If there are no moral laws, there are no broken moral laws, and therefore no problem of evil. But there is a problem of evil, therefore there are broken laws, therefore there are laws, therefore there is a God. Now, I think that is very, very tight. And the only way someone could get around it is by trying to explain how you could have a plausible explanation for the existence of objective moral goods, moral obligations, but not have a God in the picture. There just is no way to do it. Now, what we were talking about evolution, what many atheists will do is they'll invoke evolution, but evolution can't make rape wrong. It can just make us believe it's wrong.
So that would just be our belief.
Pardon me?
I said, but then that would just be our belief.
Exactly.
It's just what our culture says.
That's a relative. It relativizes morality. But if morality is relativistic, then there is no problem of evil, no objective problem of evil. But we know there is. So that can't explain what needs to be explained. And this is why I think this is such a powerful argument, because the alternatives don't work at all. And everybody knows the world is morally broken. That's the strength of the moral argument. Basically, if you're going to deny objective evil, you're denying reality, and it's obvious. Our argument affirms that. We still have to make sense of how could God allow it, whatever, that's another issue. But if there is no God, there cannot be a problem of evil, but there's a problem. Therefore, there must be a God. That's the link. That's the strength of it. So I'm just going to leave it at that and move on. Okay, Caleb?
All right. Thanks for answering my question.
Yes, you're welcome, and it's always good talking to you. Take care. Who's next? Augusta, Georgia. Jason. Let me get the right button here. Oh, no, I'm going to... Amy. God bless you, Amy. Amy's flashing. We're going to Samuel in Dayton, Ohio first, and then we'll get Jason in just a moment. Samuel? Do you like Samuel or Sam?
Sam is great, but Samuel works too.
All right.
That's easy to remember.
I like the short version. Sam, what's up? What's on your mind?
All right. So I'm doing a Bible study. A friend and I are doing a Bible study with another friend who does not know Jesus, and he's really having trouble understanding how God can be all-loving. And so he's asked this question, if God is all-loving, then why, in the case of the flood, drowning is quite painful. And so why does he make everybody drown instead of, just zapping them and getting rid of all that evil that way? And then what's an even bigger problem for him is the fact that God would put people into hell to suffer eternally for that. And so what we've tried to do is explain that, first of all, it's our choice for rejecting his eternal love, that he does offer his love to everybody, and that perhaps his definition of love is a little bit different from the Bible's, and he's expecting something different, and so he needs to read the Bible's definition of love for what it is. But it's still a really, really hard thing for him to understand how God could allow that pain to happen for people. And so what is a way that Christians in general, and for me and my friend, how can we explain that to him better?
Yeah, I'm thinking about this. I actually think this is difficult to explain to people in a way that will make sense to them. It's almost like you have to be in possession of a Christian world. I'm not saying there's nothing you could say, but I'm just saying it's difficult because you almost have to be in possession of a mature understanding of the world and of God in order to see how this could make sense. Now, we aren't in a position to say why every act of suffering is justified before God. Okay, we can't explain that. We don't know everything. We don't know why did God allow this suffering or that suffering. But that God allows suffering, or might bring judgment on a people in a way that causes suffering. That I think can be addressed, but it may not be convincing to them. And I have reasons for saying, for example, that hell is eternal conscious torment. ECT, okay? That's not a very attractive option. And emotionally, it troubles me. But I think it is revealed as such, and so I trust that God knows best on this, even though I don't even like the idea. And so sometimes the right answer is not emotionally satisfying to us. All right? So in the case of the flood, what God's action in the flood was punishment. Does the individual in question here, Sam, and this is a question I might ask, do you think punishment is appropriate for people who do evil? All right. Well, if he says no, I don't know where to go with that. Then he's not against prisons, or parking tickets, for goodness sake, because those are all punishments. Okay, and guess what? Every punishment is unpleasant, minimally. Oh, I got a parking, $25 for a parking? Oh my gosh. Well, that's unpleasant. That's suffering of some sort. All punishment entails some level of suffering. So if you are saying that a loving God would not allow any suffering for people, then you are saying that a loving God will not be just. That's what it amounts to. And I've actually given this illustration before. Let's just say, somebody assaulted your family and brutally assaulted, but got caught. And so you went in to the police station, to do whatever paperwork was necessary regarding the assault. And let's just stipulate that they got the right guy. He's guilty. And then when you got to the police station, they said, by the way, you don't have to fill any of that out. We let that person go. What? That person who assaulted my family? You let them go? Why would you do a thing like that? And they say, well, because we're a loving government. We don't want anybody to suffer. Your family suffered, but that's unfortunate. We didn't cause that, but we aren't going to cause the suffering of somebody else because they did that. Oh, now you can see how ludicrous that is. No one, even your friend, would be satisfied with that. People who are guilty of evil ought to be punished, and punishment is unpleasant. Now, if you look at the flood, the text says that all the thoughts for all men were evil continually. That's what it says. So God wiped them out. He punished them all. And he started over with 8 that survived the flood in the ark. But, those 8 didn't fare very well either because human beings are fallen. So that would be a direction to go. And that is any punishment of anybody ever justified? I'm just curious, you say to your friend. And is there any punishment that doesn't involve at some level suffering? No, punishment is justified, and all punishment involves suffering. And it's justified because God is good. That's why he punishes. You say, a good God wouldn't allow suffering. Wait a minute, it's because he's good. I make this point in the story of reality. It's because he's good that he punishes evil. He would not be good if he didn't punish evil. The problem is we are all evil in some measure, all of us. And so we're all in a bind, right?
Yes.
So that's the way I would approach it. Now, I also will make this illustration, and I do develop this also in the story of reality. I say, well, look at, are you a parent? Yeah, I am. I says, so do you take your kids to get shots when they were younger? Yeah. Well, did they like shots? No, my daughters didn't like shots. Oh, so you made them have a shot that they didn't like. Did they suffer? Was it painful? So they suffered somewhat for that. Well, why did you, a good, loving father, cause your children to suffer in this way? Well, you had a good reason. Because by the suffering of getting the needle, that would prevent a greater suffering. Okay, right. So that means suffering a dad or God, could cause or allow or even cause suffering for an adequate reason, a good reason. And one of those good reasons might be to prevent more suffering in the future, ergo the shots. So the idea is to try to get him thinking along the line that the statement, a good God wouldn't allow suffering or cause suffering, this is vacuous. This is just false. It's obviously false because goodness doesn't remove all suffering. Sometimes there's suffering for a greater purpose. Sometimes there's suffering that people deserve because they did wrong. It's an act of justice that brings the suffering. And those are the kind of points that I'd want them to think about.
Okay, yeah, I really like those illustrations. I think for him, the hardest part is the fact that after death, nobody gets another chance. Like that's, each time on earth is your chance to choose whether you will follow Jesus or not. And I think for him, maybe it's not so much the fact that God disciplines or even judges people, but just the fact that after a little while, like that suffering is permanent. So like you said, like even you struggle with people being in hell for eternity, which is something I believe in too, but it's just, I think it's a really hard hump to get over for some people.
And I think admitting that to the skeptic is helpful. I get it. I'm sympathetic to your concerns about this, but guess what? I don't know as much as God knows. And there's a rationale I can offer for eternal conscious torment, but I wish it were otherwise, but that's me. That's not God. God knows best. And so we've got to at least allow some room for that. And by the way, if we don't like it, it doesn't mean it doesn't happen.
True.
If we don't, that's a non-starter, you know. Nevertheless, whether we like it or not, this is Jesus' point of view, you know. And actually, Tim Barnett and I wrote a 3-piece solid ground, so with 3 solid grounds on this issue. And the title of the solid grounds, you can find it in our archives. The title is called Hell Interrupted, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, Hell Interrupted. And we engage these issues, and we use the Scripture to demonstrate that and in the face of all the critics, too, we deal with critics, we show that the Scripture actually teaches this. So if you're going to take a Christian perspective on this, a biblical perspective on this, that ECT is the proper conclusion given the text, even though it's unpleasant. And I think saying, well, I get it, man, I don't like it either, but doesn't change it, seems to be what Jesus believed and what the text teaches.
Okay.
Okay, Sam?
Well, thank you.
All righty, buddy. Good talking to you. Thanks for the call.
Thank you, too. Good night.
Bye. Let's take a quick break, and we'll have Jason in Augusta, Georgia, when I return on Stand to Reason. Back at you here, Greg Kokel, your host, and this is the final segment. So let's finally get to Jason in Augusta, Georgia. Jason, welcome to the show. Hi.
Hey, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Sure.
I just want to start by thanking you and your team. You've been instrumental in my growth as a Christian over the last 6 or 7 years. So I really appreciate all that you do. I'm an Outpost director and a strategic partner. So I really believe in what you guys are doing.
Good for you. Good for you. So what's on your mind?
I kind of have a two-part question. The first, trying to reconcile my theological position on a Christian's response to the use of profanity. So when I look at passages like Ephesians 4:29 and parables of like the dragnet with the good and the bad fish, Matthew 7 when Jesus talks about the tree and its fruit, and also compare with Colossians 4:6 and James 3 talking about just the power of the tongue. Is profanity or foul language something that is a sin issue, or that would be something you might consider under the confines of Christian liberty, or is it maybe somewhere in between?
Well, I think the last three passages you cited, you went kind of quick, but I think those don't apply directly to this. I mean, unless you've answered this particular question, what is profanity and how bad is it, and certainly the tongue is powerful, and the tongue can give evidence of what's inside. It's what comes out of a man that defiles him, not what goes in, Jesus says. But I think the first passage, that may be the one where he says, "Let no unwholesome word proceed from your mouth, except such a word as good for edification according to the need of the moment, that it may give grace to those who hear." Okay, so that is a direct appeal to avoid coarse language. Now, you use the word profanity, and actually that's a word that means different things to different people, And so a lot of it, notice how Paul put it, according to the need of the moment. Now, I've had discussions about this before on the air with people, and different environments dictate different ways of talking because of the sensibility of the people that are there. So there are some things that I might say, I mean, not like profanity, but it would be just a little bit more coarse when I'm talking with the guys and I wouldn't say that in mixed company, okay? Or how boys talk about bodily functions and stuff like that. Or you wouldn't say at somebody's wedding, you wouldn't say these kinds of things, because there are some things that you would do in private, break wind or something. You wouldn't do it with a lot of other people. Pardon me for bringing that up, but the point I'm making is sometimes the environment does dictate what is appropriate, and sometimes you're overcautious in certain environments so as not to bring offense. And the way Paul puts it there is to give grace to those who hear. So I think there isn't a fast rule here. Some things seem to be clearly off the reservation in terms of language and words and stuff like that, and would clearly be considered profane by people. So that, like F-bombs are everywhere nowadays, and that drives me nuts. Even when I hear so-called Christians using them, and almost like, "Oh, sorry, that just came out. I apologize." No, they're just, I'm thinking about like football quarterbacks that, big Christian guy, except for every other word is an F-bomb, and his wife is the same thing. I'm not naming names now. I'm going to just give it an example. Now, that makes me wonder, really? Okay, so that's over the top. But I do think that there is there's some point where we kind of give grace. And some of these words are somewhat incontrovertible. My wife doesn't even like "gosh darn," because she says, well, that just means the GD phrase, and you're just using other language for it. Right. And you're really saying the GD phrase. Well, look when somebody uses in a circumstance where you might say, "Gosh darn it," if somebody uses a GD phrase there, not even talking about God damning anything. They're just using his name maybe in an inappropriate way, but they're not even talking about that. Same thing with gosh darn. I think that's over the top. You're just using a noise to burn off your frustration. And as long as you're not using a noise that is God's name in an appropriate way or that is offensive to other people, then you're fine. Blow off steam. Dang it, say whatever you want. But sometimes you got people who are super sensitive about that, and then it's good just to be aware, that person is really sensitive even about dang it. So say rats or something like that. So I think that there's some flexibility there. I think that we should be careful not to be too crazy about it and be overly condemning of people and casual remarks that might be a little bit, untoward or whatever, but it's not a big deal. And then there are other things that I think are. So I think Paul's recommendation is a good one. And the idea of according to the need of the moment to give grace to those who hear. So, of course, people might interpret, well, grace means some kind of spiritual thing. I don't know if that's what he had in mind, but I just think it's good for us to be careful about our language so that we do not come across in the community that we're in as coarse and impolite. By the way, I've been reading about the Pacific War in World War II, and Admiral Nimitz, for example, who's in charge of all the fleet in the Pacific, I think it was Nimitz, that nobody ever heard a curse word from Nimitz. Now, of course, the phrase cursing like a drunken sailor, people know about that. That sailors talk that way, but not Nimitz. And that made him stand out from the rest. In a certain sense, a lot of, coarse language might have fit into that group, but he decided to stand above that, and I think that was noble. And that's something to keep in mind as well.
Okay,
Jace?
Okay, and I guess maybe in a small group setting, right, within the body, it sounds like maybe there's just a time and a place to challenge or maybe correct one another in grace, because I'll be honest, this is something that's plagued my past, and I think it's more of a personal conviction for me. So I tend to avoid that type of language, but I do hear because we are in a military community. So I just want to know, I guess, maybe how to engage, or if it's just something you just sweep under the rug, so to speak.
Yeah, I would say if you're going to correct somebody, correct them in private. That would be the best way to do it. You say,
of course, yeah,
this is a little untoward, or this isn't working. It's probably not a good idea. Didn't sound good. We don't want to leave that impression with people. I got another call to jump to. Okay, Jace?
Okay. See you in September.
All righty. Thank you for the call. Let's go to Mariah. You made it right under the wire. We got about 5 minutes.
Sounds good. Hi, Greg.
Hi there.
Years ago, you told a story about Corrie ten Boom's father asking her to lift a suitcase of watches that was just too heavy for her, and spoke about sometimes topics are just too heavy, so to speak, for young kids. So, having that story in mind, I wanted to ask if you would recommend that we keep our 4- and 8-year-old girls away from my sister-in-law's 4.5-year-old son, who continues to wear dresses and hair bows.
Mm-hmm.
We live quite far away and only see him about 3 times a year. And for the past 2 times, he's been dressing as a girl when we visited.
Mm-hmm.
And we're supposed to go camping in another week here with all my in-laws. And our older kids we're not so worried about. They've kind of been inoculated about the LGBTQ topic. But we're concerned about our 4-year-old and 8-year-old specifically on how it will affect them and whether we can prepare them enough.
Sure. Well, this is an awkward situation for you, obviously.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, my sentiments right now in the circumstance as you described it, I think it would be fine to go with your family. For you to, in a sense, back out for this reason, and it's going to be hard to back out without clarifying something that's been planned and everything. And the rest of your children, as you pointed out, have been inoculated. You still have one that may be vulnerable, but I think that can be managed by just explaining to them. Your cousin is a boy, but confused. Sometimes he thinks he's a girl, and this is why he dresses like a girl. Now,
Right.
And so I'm kind of role-playing a little bit. You'd say to you, how old is the youngest one? Yours?
4.
4. So I think a 4-year-old, this is doable, but he's confused. So we're not going to make fun of him. We're not going to be mean to him. We're just going to be kind. And it's a good lesson for us to be kind to people who are different and even confused. Now, it turns out, but you're telling him he is confused. This isn't normal. This isn't good, isn't appropriate, but he's confused. So this is an opportunity to just clarify so that your son, your own 4-year-old doesn't get confused. And you're identifying that, but you're also teaching that child to be virtuous in the process, to, in other words, engage in a virtuous way. So I had a hard time understanding some of the things you said right at the beginning, so I'm not sure.
Sorry, I was on speakerphone and switched off. They're a very liberal family. I mean, and we've used your phrase, don't expect non-Christians to act like Christians with our older kids.
Right.
That, it's just mainly that the 4-year-old, it's the closest age cousin to her, and he is very confused, and his mom is very liberal, and it's just a delicate situation.
Yes, it is. But another thing, too, you want to keep in mind is you want to, if possible, avoid any appearance of being mean-spirited. So a lot of times, Christians want to, hold the line on their beliefs, but it comes across in an unproductive way, in a mean-spirited way. This is why we have counseled with Stand to Reason. You probably heard us talk about this before. Call people by the names that they want to be called by, because names are conventions. Even Catherine Hepburn was called Mike. She had a nickname, Mike, I think so. But so you can, people have, and if you decide, I am not going to use the name that they're using for themselves because that's, a girl's name for a boy, et cetera, people aren't going to say, oh, I see you're a person of principle. No, they're going to think you're mean. That's all they're going to think. And so this isn't going to help. It's not going to help the relationship. It isn't going to help your witness. And I don't think we have a moral obligation not to use a girl's name with a boy or a boy's name with a girl, because names are kind of flexible anyway. And names are what people choose. It has become in the last 20 years, lots of kids get names that are completely invented.
Yeah.
Are these girls or boys? This is just an invented name, and it may sound a little feminine for the girl, but it's invented. It's not even on the books. Okay, so names are conventional. You can make them up, kind of thing. But when it comes to pronouns, this is where we kind of draw the line, because pronouns aren't conventions. And there's even workarounds for that. You don't use the pronouns. You don't refer by pronoun. Use the child's name instead of saying him or her. You can avoid offending somebody if they're really easily offended by you misgendering them with a pronoun. Just use the name. But I would suggest that you go and you warn your child. You do the prep work there with your 4-year-old and do the best that you can to all act normal and kind and gracious. And I'll be interested in a couple of weeks if you want to call back and tell me how it goes. We're out of time, though, so I got to run. I appreciate your call, Mariah, and God help you with that tough situation. We all face things like that. All right, there we go. Greg Kokel here for Stand to Reason. Give them heaven, friends. Bye-bye now.